Hi everyone, Gwen here from St. Louis County Parks, and today I'm at Jefferson Barracks Historic Site in South St. Louis County. I'm with Tom Hoff, the curator here at the site, and he's going to give us a little program about World War II in December of 1944.
Hi everybody, and welcome to a virtual Jefferson Barracks. As you may know, there's a strong connection between JB and the Second World War, a connection that we try to celebrate as much as we can here. And this year, unfortunately, our plans for a World War II Christmas kind of fell by the wayside. I'm sure you all understand why. So what we thought we'd do is a quick little video and talk to you a little bit about what was going on in December of 1944 and put a few things in perspective. Maybe give you a couple things to think about regarding the sacrifices that were made that year by American soldiers. By December of 1944, the drive into Germany was starting to slow down. Part of this was due to very fierce German resistance, particularly in places like the Hürtgen Forest. But another major factor, and one the Germans were very aware of, was the question of supplies for the Allied forces. Up until late November of 1944, most Allied supplies were coming in through Normandy, which was quite some distance from the front that was traveling into Germany. And it had been hoped all along that we would have captured a major port on the English Channel to bring supplies in, particularly something closer to Germany. In September of 1944, the British were able to capture Antwerp, but unfortunately the Germans had been so efficient at destroying the docks and port facilities that the port was not usable until the last weeks of November, when it finally opened up. When this happened, it cut in half the transport time for getting war material to the West Front. Which is not to say there wasn't still fighting going along on the English Channel. A lot of the smaller ports were still occupied. In fact, Dunkirk didn't surrender until 2 days after the rest of the Germans did in May of 1945. But the smaller ports could be ignored once Antwerp was held. The Germans decided it was in their best interest to make a quick drive west, fast and hard, and capture Antwerp. And by doing so, cause a split between the American and British Commonwealth forces, cause some dissension between the Allies, and cause enough of a delay that maybe they could get things sorted out on the Eastern Front where they were fighting the Russians in the massive Russian offensive that had started in the summer of 1944, known as Bagration. So they planned an offensive through the Ardennes. They had used the Ardennes Forest before in 1940 as an entry point, despite it being heavily wooded. With a restrictive road net, they had been able to push their panzers through in 1940, and they hoped to do it again in 1944. The idea was to get through the Ardennes Forest, get across the Meuse River, and get to Antwerp, and recapture Antwerp. To this effect, on December 16th of 1944, they launched a major offensive against American positions in Belgium and Luxembourg. And this is going to be the start of what we know as the Battle of the Bulge. The Battle of the Bulge is going to go on until January of 1945, actually late January of 1945. But effectively, the Germans are going to lose it within the first 12 hours of the offensive. Of course, they don't realize it's been lost, and we don't realize that we've won. It's going to take historians decades later to work through everything to figure out that. But what will happen is a very tenacious defense by American forces, such as the 28th Infantry Division along Skyline Drive, and then additional units coming up, some of whom have been very badly beaten up, like the 2nd Division, which suffered terrible losses in the Hürtgen Forest. They'll be holding the line, along with brand new formations like the 106th Infantry Division, which were sent to the Ardennes basically to get a taste of the war and shake off a little bit of their greenness. The 106th, which moved onto the line on the 10th of December, is going to be in for an incredibly rude surprise 6 days later when they're subjected to a massive German attack. They were filtering in and taking over positions that had been held by the 2nd Infantry Division, and in fact, they were supposed to take over a lot of equipment from the 2nd Infantry Division. The 2nd Infantry Division, though, was cagey enough to bring a lot of it with them, so the 106th was in a bad position. And they will, in fact, ultimately collapse within a few days of the German offensive, leading to one of the largest mass surrenders in American history. This is one of the reasons we look at the early days of the Battle of the Bulge as being such a disaster. It seemed like the Germans were everywhere, they were attacking, they just kept relentlessly moving west, but they were actually being slowed down. A couple of very important fights are going to take place in the week before Christmas. One of them is going to be around Saint-Vite, which will actually see what's left of the 106th Division forming up with other American forces, including American armored units, in order to stop the German offensive, or at least slow it down radically. By Christmas, though, the Germans have got the important town of Bastogne surrounded. Bastogne is very key because it's a road hub. And it is Bastogne which becomes, for most Americans, probably the symbol of the Battle of the Bulge. After all, this is where the Germans made their surrender demand, and the Americans famously responded nuts. With the defense centered around the 101st Airborne Division, it's going to be quite the tenacious fight. And many of the accounts of Christmas in Bastogne are rather telling, because while some soldiers talk about the grace and courtesy and generosity of Belgian families who are suffering severely from the war and the German offensive and the renewed fighting around them, the fighting continues. And Christmas Day itself will see German attacks on American positions around Bastogne. But Christmas is going to have a really weird gift for the American Army in the Battle of the Bulge. For the Americans and the British, one of the key parts of fighting the war is going to be air power. And the early days of the offensive is going to see Allied air power very limited due to the terrible weather conditions. The American Army is going to get a Christmas present, though. On December 25th, the sky's clear and airplanes can start to operate again. It's going to get very, very cold out, but the tide is going to clearly turn against the Germans. We're not going to be able to move large amounts of troops during the daylight hours. And things are going to start to shift. Along with Patton's army, which is turned north from Lorraine and is punching up into Luxembourg towards Bastogne, the tide of war is going to shift against the Germans in the Ardennes. Eventually, the German troops moving west from Bastogne, the encircled Bastogne, are going to be stopped and defeated. And Patton's troops will liberate Bastogne proper and spend most of the remainder of December and into January rolling back the German forces to their starting positions in the Schnee Eifel. Interestingly enough, the Germans are going to be launching a second offensive while all of this happens into Lorraine. It's going to be called Operation Nordwind, and that's going to be launched on New Year's Eve. And so fierce fighting is going to continue along the front, despite the Christmas season, which is held so dear by Americans and Germans alike, as well as the British, who are continuing in their liberation of Belgium and the Netherlands and pushing into Germany proper as well. We should also probably remember the Free French, who are fighting down along the Moselle River and pushing towards the Rhine also. All along the front line, Allied troops are going to make incredible sacrifices in December of 1944 in order to make the world a safer place for Christmas and other holidays in the future.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in this far. Tom's going to finish up our program at the Battle of the Bulge Monument at the park.
I'm at the Battle of the Bulge Monument here in Jefferson Barracks, and it's a very good reminder of the sacrifices that were made by young men on behalf of our freedom. The old statement that they gave their todays for our tomorrows rings true. Here at the park, we do a lot of World War II based things, and a lot of that involves dressing up and trying to recreate the years gone by. And it's always done with reverence and awe for the generation before us, and carry the torch of liberty. During the dark days of December in 1944, in foxholes, shattered farmhouses, and aid stations all across northwestern Europe, but particularly in Belgium and Luxembourg, American young men sat and shivered and shared what little they had with each other in the spirit of Christmas and in the hopes for a better day. We hope that as a nation, we never have to go through such terrible times again. But we here at the historical section of St. Louis County Parks hope that you always remember the sacrifices that were made on our behalf by those who never knew us.
Okay, thank you so much, Tom, for that really interesting program. Just a reminder to all of you at home, the park here at Jefferson Barracks is still open. There are lots of things to see and lots of space to spread out, so we hope to see you and your family over the winter months still enjoying the park.